I know that the thing that Sonia mentioned very much was the connection of the inner and the outer. And so I'd be very interested to hear your personal experience of that. How do you think that these things work together? Because usually people look outside and whatever's going on is going on, and my own inner world is my private domain that only I know about, and I really don't think
in the best of cases we know about it.
Well, most times we don't realize that there's a connection there. So I'd be very interested to hear your experience and understanding of that.
Well, I'm not sure if there is an understanding, but I think there's a suspicion. I have come to think about climate change as the best crisis that we've ever created. And created, I use very deliberately because it is of our own doing. And I think it is a crisis, or science has told us it is a crisis because we're running out of time to address it. But the reason why I think it's the best crisis we've ever created is because it opens or it forces a learning that we haven't engaged in before. And the wisdom of not wasting any crisis is definitely here with the climate. So, in the spirit of not wasting the best crisis we've ever created, it might be interesting to do a thought experiment. What happens if over the next 10 to 20 years, we do everything that we need to do in the so-called outside world to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? What if, we move beyond fossil fuels and we regenerate the land and we reforest and we save at least some of the coral reefs, etc. Long list. Would that have been enough of a learning and enough of a harvesting of that crisis for the good? Now, I know that most people will say, well, in any event, whatever you have just said is very difficult. True, but moving beyond fossil fuels, regenerating the land, and all of that is only difficult from the viewpoint of the qualities of being and thinking that we have right now. And so to me, the best way not to waste the best crisis that we've all created is actually to take on the challenge of going inside and discovering who we really are. And how do we want to turn up in the world? How do we approach the crisis that we're in? Because was it not Einstein who said there's no point in attacking a problem from the same point of view or with the same stand that created the problem? So if we're only going to go and try to do in the outside world what we must, from the inner point of view that we have right now, we have actually wasted the crisis.
Agree.
We have wasted the crisis, because it does seem to me that the crisis now is so profound and so urgent and so all-encompassing that what it calls for is for a regeneration not only of the land and our energy system, etc., but a regeneration of who we truly are. And in as much as we get in touch with that and change our mental chip and change the heart chip and change the soul's chip with which we turn up in the world, well then, you know what? Then everything else in the outside world is going to be so much easier, because we have changed our attitude. We have changed the stance with which we approach all of that. So why waste the crisis?
It's true that sometimes, just like when there's physical illness, the physical illness triggers off the opportunity to look inside and see what's going on. And maybe people haven't always made the connection of the psyche and the soma and don't understand in theory what psychosomatic illness is. But the soma is suffering, the body is suffering, and so it just gives you the space to look within. And then you begin to see what's going on, and maybe there's a connection between inside and the body. And so, yes, the planet is sick, and we've made it sick. And so what are we going to do about it? And as you said, it's not just a question of a few forests more and things like this, but what is it that led to that crisis? Because you can create a beautiful garden, but if you haven't changed the mindset of people who are going to play in the garden, then they're going to destroy the garden again. And so the mindset needs to change. And I was curious when you used the term understanding our own selves, understanding our identity in a different way. And I'm not sure how you would explain that further, but for me it means coming to the very deep realization that the inner being, the being that I am, is a spiritual being. And so in that awareness of my own spiritual identity, then yes, I look at the whole world very differently, and I know what it is I need to do to be able to support nature, support the earth and the ecosystem, and to help it further develop and stay in harmony with it rather than destroy it and exploit it.
Can I ask you to go a little bit further on that? Because I've been recently looking into the concept of regeneration. That is being a very attractive concept to natural scientists, and in particular to those who are working on land use issues, and who are very correctly saying that we need to regenerate those lands. And we actually need to, as we do that, we can tap in to the natural regenerative power of nature, because nature regenerates herself if we don't get in the way. But I would love to hear from you how would you describe the regenerative power that we have inside? Because all of that is linked. There is no such thing as regenerate land over here, regenerate the oceans over here, regenerate me over here. The fact is, it's all linked. But I would love to hear it in your words.
It's a long story. I'll try and simplify it. My experience tells me that at this moment, generally, the state of the human soul and the state of the world, as you said, is linked together. And we're at our lowest ebb. And the evidence I have this for myself is that before I started to meditate, it was difficult to focus my mind. It was not possible to concentrate for long periods of time. Decision-making was a challenge, and I didn't realize what were the influences that were working on me. And through study of spirituality and spiritual teachings, I came to understand that, yes, this is a time when the inner battery has become discharged, but it's also possible to recharge that inner battery. But I wouldn't be able to do it myself on my own. There's something I need to do. And the song was very apt, that I can't do it myself, but together we can do it. But also, not just you and me together. I deeply am aware that we need the help of the divine, the source. And it was interesting when I was sharing with you that concept of the point of light that we meditate on, and how the name that we use for that essence, that supreme being, the being of light, is the word Shiva. And the word Shiva has 3 translations. Firstly, it means the seed. the regeneration, the new beginning, the creation. And secondly, it also means the point, the source of all positive attributes. And thirdly, it means the benefactor, the one who's able to uplift. And so when I connect, coming to the awareness of who I truly am, the inner being, the soul, and when I, the soul, connect with the divine, then I'm able to draw that regenerative energy into myself, and that transformation that happens within my own inner world is the regeneration of the spirit. And that gives me a new vision, a new understanding, and a very different level of capacity to be able to do something for the world out there. And so my relationship with the world, with people, changes, but in particular also in this context, my relationship with the whole of the ecosystem changes. And so because there's a regenerative energy which is very powerful and positive, now I'm able to use that and apply it in everything that I do in terms of the natural world. And so it's, yes, that awareness of I, the inner being, but also that connection with the divine that's able to bring about that energy within the self, and the recharging of the battery happens in this way.
And I would say that's where you realize that all of this is interconnected.
Absolutely.
Right? Because otherwise we stay in the silos, and we curtail our potential to be able to lift, to be able to leaven the load. But it has to be quite intentional. It has to be quite intentional. Recently, I was at an event with the wonderful Sir David Attenborough. And if some of you haven't seen Our Planet in all 8 episodes, I very much encourage you to see those episodes that he has recently narrated. But I was at an event in which he was presenting them, and he made a statement that seared through my soul. He said, "The Garden of Eden is no more." And for someone who's 93, who has seen so much in this world, who was born in the previous geological era, right? He was born in the Holocene, and we're now living in the Anthropocene. It's not that many people who can say, I was born in a previous geological era, and now I'm in another geological era. So, and he can say that. But I was actually quite pained to hear him say, the Garden of Eden is no more. And he said it in reflection, I'm sure, of the physical damage that we have caused out there in the natural world. Well, in my response to him, I admitted painfully that the Garden of Eden is no more, and therefore we have to create a garden of intention. Because it's not that we can just stand back and say the Garden of Eden is no more, and therefore we don't have any responsibility. If that is so, and it is so, and we see all the science on that, then there is a responsibility that we all have as sentient beings on this planet to then co-create together the next chapter of that garden. And if it's not Eden, because it's not going to be perfect, because we have lost 60% of the species are already extinct and 1 million on their way out. So it won't be Eden anymore, but it's got to be a garden of intention. It has to be somewhere where we go and with clear intent and very razor clear purpose, define how we want to be in the world, how we want to connect with ourselves, how we want to connect with others, how we want to connect with nature, and how do we want to connect upstairs. Because otherwise, we're just crossing our our arms and twiddling our fingers and just accepting that we have actually seen the demise of the Garden of Eden. And that is where I actually have a difference of opinion from those whose grief I totally understand and whose grief I share about the decimation that we have caused, but I just don't feel that we can stay in that grief. I think we have to honor that pain, honor that grief, and use it to fertilize, if you will, to fertilize a different attitude and a different engagement. I remember one time when I was dealing with a very difficult issue. I walked out of the room, of the house in which I was, and I happened to be on a cow farm. And the first thing that I walked out onto was this huge pile of manure. Very odorous. And I stood looking at this huge pile of manure in front of me, and I thought, that's exactly what my life feels like right now. And then, but it was really it was 3 times as tall as I am. I'm not very tall, but 3 times as tall as manure is pretty big. And I looked up, and there was a beautiful sunflower growing out of the pile of manure. And I thought to myself, oh, there's a message here. There's a message here. And the message is, we can't avoid, the pile of manure piling in front of our homes, because it always does, every day in different ways. But we can, with intentionality, we can coax the sunflower to grow out of the pile of manure, and to understand that the pile of manure is fertilizer for that. And as long as we only see it as the pile of manure, then that's the only thing we're going to get. That is a crisis wasted. If we don't waste the crisis, and we understand that the pile of manure is actually incredibly rich in learnings and in enlightenment and in taking the next step in our personal development, then we love the pile of manure until the sunflower comes out. And it's just, isn't it? I actually think the world is so humorous, because what a fun way to give me a lesson in a moment in which I really needed the lesson. Big pile of manure, sunflower on the top. It stayed with me forever.
When we think about the subject of karma, usually people think about words and actions, and that's definitely very much connected with the whole subject of what you sow, so shall you reap, and that story of cause and effect and so on. But when you use the word intentionality, it reminded me that, in fact, even before the action is performed, and even before we think about the quality of that karma, it's the subject of intention. Mm-hmm. And what is the intention behind the action that I'm doing?
Exactly.
And so if I'm aware of intention, then I'm going to make sure that the intention is the highest, the cleanest, the purest. And in that elevated consciousness of good intention, then what I do is going to be able to recreate the Garden of Eden.
Exactly.
And I believe that it's not just that it's gone and only part of it is possible to recover, but I think actually things work in cycles. And so there was a Garden of Eden, and we've done what we've done, and it's us that have done it, and so it's all of us together that have to regenerate it and transform it. And I think that what's ahead of us is another Garden of Eden. And so, yes, I love your term, the stubborn optimist. And I'd like to think it's not just optimism, but I'd like to think that it's actually reality, that after the darkness comes the light. And so today, collectively, our intention to be able to do that which is noble and elevated, both in terms of what I can do for myself, so compassion for myself and doing that which I know is right and is going to be of benefit, but also in terms of my neighbors, and whether you're in Costa Rica or London, you're very much my neighbor. So whether we are doing something for the self or our neighbors or for the natural world, I think that intention is now, it has to be really that we want to not just save the planet, because the planet doesn't need saving, it's eternal.
Fine without us.
Exactly. But to have that intention of recreating, co-creating a very beautiful garden. And I think that it's possible, because humans, when they have the right motive, the right intention, are able to reach the moon. They're able to do that which was considered impossible. And especially if it's co-creating something with the power of the divine, then yes, what today seems impossible is we're only saying it's impossible because we haven't seen it happen. But if we start doing something, then we can see the reality of what can happen.
Well, you're pushing all my wonderful buttons here. Because many years ago, I took on a commitment and to be true to a thought that I actually saw on somebody's mantelpiece, and when I asked him where did that come from, he had no idea. But what it said was, optimism, impossible is not a fact, it's an attitude. To which for myself, I put comma, only an attitude, right? Because, as you say, impossible, we tend to think that which we have not seen or have not done is impossible. But that's just because we have that attitude. If we change that attitude, then the impossible becomes probable, likely, possible, and in fact even unstoppable, right? And it's all about how we approach that, which brings me to the topic of optimism, because I have a very particular definition for optimism. So for me, optimism is not just blind hope or naive faith that things are going to happen without me doing anything about it. It's a very clear intent. So it takes us away from the action to the higher level or the anterior level of what is my intent here. And if we know that we have a huge challenge, but the intent is to reach or to create a different reality from the one that we're experiencing right now, then that to me is optimism, is the capacity to see beyond what is physically visible to us right now, to see beyond that, to know that there is another reality that we can definitely create, co-create, move toward with the help of others and the above captain in the boat up there, who all of us together can actually do something, create something that is different from what we're seeing now. And to have that conviction that that is entirely possible is, to me, optimism. So optimism to me is like, it's different than a celebration, right? We just had a wonderful dinner. Thank you very much for a wonderful dinner. And we celebrated with a wonderful cake. I'm sorry that you didn't share that. That's celebration. That is the end result of something that has been achieved, in this case, the fantastic product of the wonderful women in the kitchen. But that's not optimism. Optimism to me is not the result of having achieved something. It's actually the stance or the attitude, the conviction with which you approach, in particular, a tough challenge, such as climate change. In particular, something that you know is going to take quite a bit of effort and quite a few people to work on it, and that you know that you have to summon all the energy that there is in order to make that happen, but knowing that it is entirely possible to do that. And the reason why I call it stubborn optimism is because my family told me when I was 3 that I was stubborn, and I continue to wear that with pride, particularly because I have learned that if it's for the common good, we better be stubborn. Because there's no way that we can give up or give in to the barriers, the challenges, everything that we're going to have on our way to addressing climate change. We just have to be relentless about it. We have to say, okay, well, that door is closed, therefore, where are the windows? And which window are we going to go through? And if that window closes, then, it seems like there's a little crack in the ceiling. Let's try that one. You have to always move forward independently of what seems to be stopping you, and just be very stubborn about finding the next step forward, because there are some things that we cannot compromise on, and we cannot compromise on the quality of life of our descendants and of 7 generations down the line. That is something that we are not going to compromise on.
For me, it would be the whole subject of spirituality, to be able to see beyond the limited, the reality that I'm seeing here, but to have that spiritual insight and being able to see what is possible and probable and out there. And so when I have that awareness, then what's going to happen is that I can see into the future, and it's not so far away, not so distant, but I can actually move towards it and make it a reality today. But it's the awareness of going beyond limited vision. And when I'm just in my physical state, the physical identity of this form, then I see time and distance and space, and everything is in this narrow box.
Constrained.
That's right. And it's only when I step into my own spiritual identity that I'm able to step outside this box, but also the box that other people have put me into. And then I see what is further ahead. And so spirituality is that unifying force that brings us together. Religion or traditions are whatever they are, but as we come to a spiritual consciousness together and we hold that vision of the new reality, then yes, together we can co-create that. And yes, absolutely, it happens through our vision, the intention, but also then through the change of attitude, and knowing that yes, that is humanly possible. It's not out of reach, it's not out of touch. We can do it together. And so I know that one of the things when interfaith discussions came into climate change and were more readily being accepted by everybody, because there was a time when they weren't being accepted, but that changed, and then people started to accept the interfaith input. And I remember the person who was the secretary of the World Council of Churches at that time. He stated that the purpose of our being here is to offer hope. And it brought a different energy into the discussions to talk about hope for the future. And so when you're very limited, then there's a beginning and end to this, and that's it. This finishes and you're done, no more. But in spiritual awareness, you know that there's something beyond, and the further 7th generation. And so when you have that vision, it takes you into a different dimension. And so this is why I think that if we're to move forward, then spirituality plays a fundamental role in being able to shift us from where we are today. And a lot of people are depressed and unhappy because they feel that we can't do anything more, and a lot of people are putting out that message.
Because they're in that box.
And so maybe part of our job is to help people come out of that box and come to a new spiritual awareness and understanding.
There's something endearing about that. And the image that comes up for me is when, as an adult, you see a child crawling and then beginning to walk. And I'm sure that that child probably thinks, I'm never going to make it. I'm going to stay crawling for the rest of my life, right? Because it's really difficult. The first little times, that they stand up and then they fall again. And it's quite, when we see that, we as adults know that that is a transition. We know that that child will perfectly well be able to stand up and walk and run, and in fact, win a marathon if they so choose. And so it's endearing to see what I would say is the frustration of a child, with full respect for the child, but because you know that the ultimate reality is very different than the reality that is being experienced by that child right now. And in a sense, that's what happens, right? When we stand at in a different space and hold ourselves open to everything that is possible. And then we see something that seems like a crawling or first step effort. There's something almost endearing, or I would say even humorous, about that effort, particularly if it's our own effort, okay? Then you really have to laugh about yourself. Because if you can catch yourself thinking or putting yourself into the box and thinking this is the only option that we have. We're just never going to stand up and walk and run. And we so often do that. But if you can catch yourself and distance yourself from that and see yourself in that box, it's actually quite humorous and very endearing, about our human efforts. Just, keep on going. But in order to see the humor and the endearing about it, you have to stand outside the box. Otherwise, if you're in the box, then there's nothing fun about it.
No.
That's very frustrating.
It's a struggle. So yes, I see a lot of people struggling. There's another word we use for this idea of stepping out of the box and being able to see the humor and the fun of it. And we call it the stage of being the observer. Mm-hmm. So on the one side, I'm the actor playing my role, and I don't realize that I'm actually also the scriptwriter of the role that I'm playing. And whatever script I write for myself, that's what's going to unfold in front of me. So that's another very beautiful thought, to know that I'm not just the actor making the motions, but I'm also actually deciding what role it is I want to play in the context of you and me, but also others, but also the world. But I can also be something else. I can be the observer. And if I can detach and be the observer and see what's going on, then my vision again is expanded. Mm-hmm. Then I'm not just in this limited vision, in this narrow space, but I can see a bigger picture. And when I see the bigger picture, then I realize that yes, although what I've done is maybe not the best, but now I have an opportunity with many others to do that which can be the best and create that transformation inside and outside.
And the other thing that witness stance or observer role does is it liberates me from putting myself in the victim role. Which is something that we do unless we're conscious about it and extract ourselves from that constantly. Every day we fall into some kind of a victim role. Poor me, whatever, it's either about something inconsequential about our transport that day, or it's something very consequential about a broken marriage in my case, and when we conceive of ourselves as being only in that box, then it's very easy to export the responsibility of what has happened to everybody else who's in that box, or to one person. And so it wasn't my fault, it's because so-and-so did whatever. And then you start this very, very dangerous victim-perpetrator dynamic that I see, and I'm sorry, I always see in little pictures. I never graduated from kindergarten, so everything is in little pictures. And the image that comes up for me in this victim-perpetrator dynamic is a seesaw. Because the moment that I put myself in the role of a victim, I am at the bottom of the seesaw. And I have decided that I'm at the bottom because this person has done whatever. And if I then accuse that person of having done X, Y, Z, consciously or unconsciously, that person will not stay in the role of the perpetrator where I want to put her or him, but that person will turn around, defend themselves, and say, no, I did A because 2 days before you had done B. And all of a sudden the seesaw goes, right? And now the person that I had accused with my thinking or with my words or with my actions as being the perpetrator, now that person in self-defense, because who wants to be a perpetrator, has now accused me of being the perpetrator, and that person puts themselves into the victim role. And this goes on and on and on. And every time, I was recently in Israel and Palestine, and I mean, the victim-perpetrator dynamic in that region goes back thousands of years. And it's constantly like this. And you can see it in history, but you can also see it in our personal life. And we do that. We accuse somebody in thought or in words or whatever of being a perpetrator. That person defends themselves, and we do this constantly. And the only way, and there is no way to finally say, right, we now have the final decision. It is you who's the victim and you who's the perpetrator. That doesn't exist. The only way to get out of that dynamic is to stand outside of the dynamic and to see it from the witness or the observer role, and to understand that, yes, there is a human propensity to do that, but that I do not have to participate of that. And that I can stand and observe it, I can stand and witness it, I do not have to participate there. And by doing that, by standing outside and just observing it, in the best of all cases, you can see the humor of it, but it's very difficult to get to the humor very quickly. But you definitely get yourself out of the poor me thinking. And you really begin to see this from a much larger perspective. And as you do that, you're able to do that not just for yourself, or I am able to do it not just for myself, but I'm able to do it for the processes and the systems that I'm involved in. Because you have been able to take that observer role. Did I say anything that make any sense?
I'm appreciating what you're sharing, and I just want you to take that the step further that you explained to us at some point, maybe it was in Iceland, how that changed the dynamic of the developing and the developed countries in coming to the Paris Agreement.
Yes. So it's I'm still chewing on that. I'm still digesting it because it was such a big lesson for me that I'm like, wow, let me take some time to see that. So here's that story. To those of you who follow the climate negotiations, and even those who don't, you can imagine that given the fact that it is a historical reality, that it is the industrialized countries who have put the greenhouse gases up in the atmosphere that have caused climate change, and developing countries have not. They will increasingly in the future, but looking to the past, as we call historical responsibility, developing countries have no historical responsibility. And so that causes in that negotiation a north-south victim-perpetrator dynamic that has gone on per secula seculorum, or at least since 1992, when the Climate Convention was first adopted in Rio. Because, and in fact, in the Climate Convention, the first legal document that came before the protocol and before the Paris Agreement, it's very, very clear who's the victim and who's the perpetrator. Now, they don't use those words, but they certainly very clearly ascribe responsibility, different responsibility, to industrialized countries and to developing countries. Everybody agreed to it at the time, fine. Fast forward, Paris Agreement. We have worked for 5 years to get the countries from where they were, not talking to each other, throwing rotten tomatoes at each other, in 2009, work to regenerate confidence, trust, dialogue, and we've been able to have the parameters of what can be a global agreement where everyone is going to participate, not just industrialized countries. And at certain critical time, the negotiation comes to a full stop for days because of this victim-perpetrator dynamic. And I'm sitting there observing this and going, this is really bad news, because the Paris meeting is coming up in just a few months. We really need to get beyond this. And here was the aha moment that came to me. Because I asked myself, how am I contributing to this paralysis? How am I contributing to the victim-perpetrator dynamic that is stopping this agreement and that is objectively the case, but is not helpful, and we have to get beyond it? And the answer to my question, how am I contributing to that, came loud and clear after a meditation session that I had, which was, I am seeing myself as the victim, the innocent, poor little me, victim of the breakdown of my marriage. And I am, in thought and in word, accusing my former husband of victimizing me. And I was fully convinced of this. And I thought, that's really interesting. So I am living into that dynamic. I'm carrying that dynamic with me. Certainly at night, because that's when I deal with my personal stuff, but also there's no such thing as leaving that reality and that sense, that internal reality. You can't live an internal reality at night and then, when the sun comes up and you go to the office, you leave that internal reality and you have a different, it just doesn't exist. Your internal reality is with you all the time. And I realized, oh boy, I'm taking that internal reality that I am fertilizing through my thinking and through my suffering and through my tears and all of this. I am taking that internal reality of a victim-perpetrator dynamic into my day job. Not intentionally, but quite effectively, because there they were, right? Smooth way, all the way. And I must admit, it wasn't, now I'm saying it as though it were easy, but it wasn't an easy mental shift for me to understand that I was holding responsibility. Not full, because there's shared responsibility, but I was holding a critical part of the responsibility because I was feeding that dynamic with my internal reality. Not that anybody knew about this. This was, like state secret. Nobody knew what was going on in my life. But my internal reality definitely knew, and there's someone up there that knows, and all of this was spilling over onto the negotiations. And so it took me a while to figure out, right, I have to take that observer stance. I have to, without denying everything that has happened, but my responsibility here is to extract myself from the victim role and accusing the other as being a perpetrator, who of course had accused me of being you can picture that. Extract myself from that and go into my observer role, my witness role, and see that that is, as I said before, a human propensity, but that it does not have to control me. And it does not have to decide and define what my today reality is. And certainly not what my future reality is. And in as much as I did that cleaning up job for myself, lo and behold, what do you think happened? There were fewer tomatoes being thrown. And over a space of time, we were able to re-engage in negotiations and find a legal text that is today in the Paris Agreement that actually is the political coming together of North and South around that particular issue. Well, what a learning for me. What a learning for me. Because we tend to think, and this is where we started this conversation, we tend to think that my inner reality is completely separate from the external, and that is not so. The fact is, this is a continuum, there is a thread, there is energy that is in constant cycling, outside, inside, and we are totally responsible for our inside energy. We're totally responsible for our thinking. We're totally responsible for our acting. We're totally responsible for anything that goes on inside. Don't start blaming your mom. That's, as my daughters would say, that's so 5 minutes ago. It's not your mother's fault. It's not your father's fault. It's not your husband. It's not your wife's fault. We assume that responsibility. I personally, in each of us, has to assume that responsibility to clean up the shop as much as possible so that you don't take your very heavy backpack, your personal backpack, and dump it onto whatever you're working on. It's just so irresponsible, right? It literally is like taking a backpack with all of my stuff, all my heavy rocks, and dumping it right there in the middle of the work that I'm doing. It's just very irresponsible. But not only is it irresponsible, it's counterproductive, because the moment that I see the relationship between what is going on out there and I can see and what is going on inside, then you see that you have a very powerful lever, and one that no one has any control over other than myself. And I can pull that lever, I can move that lever, and then I can stand back and trust that my lever that I have moved is actually going to move that.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Can we take a moment to have some reflection before we move on to the next part of this event? Sit comfortably, preferably both feet on the ground, so that the body is balanced. I've been hearing about the inner and the outer. I see the state of chaos out there. To what extent is it that I am responsible? Well, let me take a look inside. And going on that inner journey, I see that my thoughts are moving very fast. But let me watch my thoughts. And as I watch my thoughts, they slow down. can I experiment and see if I create a thought of peace, what is its impact? I hold peace in my thoughts, and peace begins to feel comfortable. Peace feels natural. It feels as if peace belongs to me. And holding this thought, can I send this vibration out there? The thought of peace, shared first with my own ecosystem, this physical body of mine, and then further out, the thought of peace to my human family, can I send that thought of peace even further? Can I send peace to all forms of life? So that they experience safety, and peace out into nature itself, all the elements that make up the natural world, and our thoughts of peace touch nature and remove the anger of nature. Our violence against nature has made nature angry, but now we serve nature by sending out thoughts of peace. And nature responds. And nature begins to work in harmony with the human family. And our thoughts of peace create a world of harmony. I in harmony with myself, I in harmony with others around me, in harmony with all forms of life, and the entire planet. I hold that awareness and keep that inner state of peace so that I move towards making that vision a reality. Om Shanti. Thank you.
I collected so many phrases and keywords that I haven't heard before. The wisdom of not wasting the best crisis we've had. the generative powers of the Supreme, and from the Garden of Eden to the Garden of Intention. And we can't compromise of the quality of the life for next generation, to create the future we want, to bring the humorous aspect, but also this very powerful last story about how inner change in the outer side. And I was thinking how nice if all of us would give one personal story on this, like Christiana did. What a powerful collection of stories that would be. So we open now up for questions, and there is microphones here available. So I hope you have some questions, and we can have a 20 minutes, half an hour dialogue together with you and Christiana and Sister Jayanti. So if you have a question, you indicate, and we get a microphone. We start here, yes, and then it's your time, yeah.
Thank you. Wow, thank you for that. It was really inspiring, and I actually wanted to share my own story quickly and then ask a question. So I worked in banking for many years here in London, and then about a year ago started a sabbatical. So I decided that I needed to take time away. And one of the things that I did was spend several months traveling around Patagonia, which is one of the wildest places left on the planet. And for me, it was so far out of my box, right? Out of career expectations, personal, family, societal, etc. And upon coming back 10 days ago, after all this time away, back into the box, my previous life as such, it's actually been really overwhelming, very frustrating, but actually exciting in the same way, because I've come back with a very different intention, and all of the lessons I learned from nature and spending time there, I now have here, and so I draw on it a lot. But one of my spiritual teachers said something to me which I really struggle with. So he says about intention, he says, once you manifest that intention, the most important thing you can do is to let it go. And as I think in society we learned we have to keep acting, what decisions are you making, what are you doing? And that's what I'm struggling with right now is I know that I'm going to change my life off the back of the experience that I've had, the work that I want to do, etc. I suppose that's my intention, or getting there. But then how do you strike that balance with letting it go when in society, I don't think that's how most of us are geared.
You have a wise teacher. The way I think about that is to set the intention and then hold it lightly. And I don't think that those things contradict each other, because you can, and at least I prefer to have an intention, to set the intention of where you would like to go, what is the reality that you would like to create and invite others to create, but not to get so completely attached to that when much higher wisdom comes and says, well, it's okay, but how about a little bit on this side? That then you close the door on higher wisdom. So setting the intention, I think, is critical, because what you do is you set a direction, but you hold it lightly, and you are open to a lot of energy, collective, individual, superior energy that comes and helps you sort of be on your way. And very often you end up in a much better place than you thought that you would. So I think the balance there, as I say, is to set the intention and then hold it lightly and be very open to wondrous things that will happen.
Beautiful. So just a little bit of a different perspective, agreement totally, but when I have intention, then I know the direction that I need to go in. But if I focus too strongly on a destination, then I'm not able to do the things that I need to do here and now, because I'm just thinking about that. So I'm on track, and I see the destination, but it'll happen. I have the total faith. I'll use that word. I have the faith that it's going to happen, but let me also give attention to what needs my attention here and now.
There's a question up here.
Thank you. I have, I guess, the same question at a personal level and a professional level. I strive to keep my environment also and with people that we share the same values, and in that sense with my friendships, which I consider the soul family, and sometimes a person reveals a certain kind of a character that you realize is not that well intended as you thought. And in situations like that, I clear myself from those toxic energies. But how do we navigate that? Because some of my friends say that my values are very strict and of historical proportions, and in today's world, people are so flaky in accommodating things by convenience that I don't go by, and now I'm seen kind of like radical or the minority. And so how do we do that at a personal level? So when you, I exercise compassion, not judgment, only that I do not want to feed that into my inner circle. And then at a professional level as well, I am also very careful with the associations of the companies that I choose to work with as a consultant. But the more and more, and I've worked with the G20 and all the major platforms, but then you think, how do you not associate, let's say, with the Googles or the Facebook, and at the same time not speak just to the converted? So how to balance those? I guess the same kind of route, but at different levels. Thank you.
In terms of my personal life, I do have to be very careful. What is it that I'm exposing myself to? And if it's relationships that are toxic, that are not useful at this moment, again, it's intention. If I have that intention of moving away from those circumstances, drama will take me in a different direction to the other, and I'll be able to protect myself. I think, again, it's intention that has to be very, very clear. And in terms of professional life, I think, again, if really my commitment is to my own inner core values and I hold those dear, then I'm not going to allow myself to be compromised either for the sake of more money or a higher position or a higher role, because I know that that's still very, very limited, and my vision is now focused on something else. And so I think it's clarity and understanding what my own core values are and whether I want to hold on to those.
Let me perhaps compliment by saying, you're not going to be surprised by this. The image that comes up for me, is a series of concentric circles. Because I don't think the question that you're asking is an either or black and white question, because there is no such thing as either or black and white. Everything is much more tones of. And the reason why I think of concentric circles is because if you are aware that you're standing in the middle of all of these concentric circles, and the closest circle around you is the one that you really want to both protect and nourish, I'm going to use the word ferociously, but I don't mean it in a negative sense. I mean it in a positive sense. And you want to make sure that the energies that you have there, both yours and those that are in that space, are very much energies that are contributing to the same good. But as you go out and out to further concentric circles, that is where, not out of a compromising stand, but out of a compassionate stand, which you used, you can't expect or judge everyone in all of those concentric circles to have the same ferocious protection that you do in the center one. And that's where you can begin to place your, companies or your friends. Are they in the center, or are they maybe in circle number 3? It doesn't mean that you don't talk to them ever again, but it just means that you have a little bit more of a guarded distance. And you don't want to throw them completely out of your life, because there's a reason why they're there. They're probably there so that you can learn something. Everybody that we have something negative about is a teacher. And so you don't want to throw them out of your life because you've lost the lesson. Don't lose the lesson, right? Find out what the lesson is. But that person doesn't have to be within your your tightest circle. So I think that flexibility allows you to protect yourself and nourish those around you, while learning and loving from others that are a little bit farther away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's a question here.
Andrew Stone. I've lived my life always. I have this thing but what happens if it doesn't happen? So I go in optimistically, but I always have a plan if it doesn't happen. I think that here, with the Brahma Kumaris, there's something really important and vital. I've been to many conferences. I was in Iceland. I've spoken in the House of Lords about trying to stop the climate. And I'm optimistic that we might, but we might not. And I think that most people think that what will happen is, oh my goodness, in one day there'll be this huge tsunami and everyone will be dead. No. You know that it's going to take 10, 15 years for there to be drought, floods, famine, immigration. And I think that we should be thinking about, my goodness, if this is going to happen, how are we going to behave? And when I think of most nations and most organizations, they're going to think, we better get to a high mountain, get a load of potatoes and canned goods, get a big gun, and make sure we survive. And that would be a terrible way of going for the human race. As the Brahma Kumaris are in 120 countries, I don't know whether you've started this, but I think that what we should be thinking about is, if this is going to happen, and as it happens, how are we going to behave? So if it is going to go that way, then what a beautiful way to go if you behave as is the wont of this place. And if we start setting that example as to how we're going to behave if it does going to happen, first of all, you'll bring to everybody's notice, my goodness, it could happen, we better change. And secondly, people might start behaving. So I just want to know if you've made any plans that way.
What plans have you made?
The plan is, how can I maintain stability and have resilience? How can I develop my capacity to be able to have greater tolerance? Can I simplify my needs so that really I'm not dependent on luxury, material comfort, and all the external things that we have at the moment? But what would happen if I didn't have all those things and we come down to a very, very basic lifestyle? Would I be okay with that? Can I maintain an inner state in which I'm fearless and I don't have anxiety and worry about the future, but I'm able again to see that yes, the right thing is going to happen if I have the right intention and attitude. And so it's the inner preparation more than, yes, a sack of potatoes and a gallon of water. And yes, if I do have a sack of potatoes and I've got lots of neighbors around, I have to have a big heart and an open heart and share that with all my neighbors, because it'll be a community that works together and lives together. It's not an individual. And so, yes, that inner preparation is something which is a daily rehearsal. Can I maintain that inner peace and calm and all the other things that I've spoken about?
I love that, and I would say it's the inner preparation for success, not for failure. Because if we prepare inside, but we're thinking I'm only going to be successful inside, outside there's going to be a failure. There's a contradiction there. We've already established, right, this evening that there's no division, true division between what we experience inside and what we manifest outside. And so we cannot fall into the simplistic thinking that I'm going to prepare myself internally for failure externally. No, I'm going to prepare myself internally, because that internal preparation is going to be the leaven that is needed for the outside success. Otherwise there is, what do psychologists call when people have two different personalities? Yeah, more than that. What is it?
Split.
Schizophrenia. Otherwise, it's a schizophrenic position, right? I'm going to prepare myself internally, as Sister has said, but I'm preparing for the disaster outside. No. This is the whole point. The whole point of not wasting the crisis is to prepare and transform ourselves internally so that we can transform the outside.
Thank you very much. Do we have... we have so many questions here.
Somebody here.
Quick question.
Quick questions. Then we take 3 quick questions, okay? They're all quick?
Yes, very quick. Thank you for having us here today. If you're walking home from work every day and you see the same tramp and you want to give them a cup of tea or coffee or something to eat, but they ask for money, this one always gets me. What's the right thing to do? Should we take £20 and say here? Or should we not, because it might encourage some other kind of trade? It always gets me. Can you help me here? I know the power of intention is good. I know what's inside my heart. But help me out. What's the right thing to do? Either of you. Thank you.
A long time ago, I realized in India that external and internal might be very different in these situations. And in India, at that time, I was seeing a lot of begging. I hadn't seen anything like that here, and it was a shock. And then I realized through various situations that giving money would perhaps encourage habits that were not so conducive to well-being, and it wasn't a good idea. Give as much food as you wish to, as much food as they would like to have, even take away for any family they might have, but not money. It can have the wrong impact.
Thank you. Another quick one. I also have a quick one, actually.
How does this work? Oh, sorry. This would be a question for Christiana Figueres primarily, but not excluding others either. I understand as a former executive secretary of the United Nations Climate Convention, you must have been present to many meetings with the heads of state or representatives of the countries in important meetings regarding the climate change. That's a fact, I understand. But my question is, which is the most efficient way to achieve, how to say that, beneficial results to reverse the climate change? Is it through the governments, through the establishments, or directly connecting to people? If we know how some governments are stubborn, how they...
Always for the common good, of course.
How it is difficult to overcome certain interests. And the majority of people, I believe, are in favor of doing something. It's just that they don't know how to approach it. Thank you.
First, let me congratulate you for being able to pronounce that whole title that is completely unpronounceable. Former Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Nobody can do that. So congratulations for that. You know, it just occurred to me as you were posing your question, it just occurred to me that what we did in order to bring countries around the table in a harmonious fashion is yet another expression of the conversation that we've been having here, which is alignment. Because if we were to bring this conversation about inner and outer onto one concept, we would say the inner reality is aligned with the outside reality, right? And the more carefully thought out and intentional the inner reality is, the more powerful you are out there because they are aligned. Well, interestingly enough, that is exactly the logic, although I hadn't made this relationship here, but it's exactly the logic that we used to bring countries around, where we said, let's align your interests. Let us understand, or let me understand, what is your national interest, your national vision, your national aspirations for sustainable development. Let's understand that, and then let's align that little national need with the global need. And it was that sweet spot of where each country could see that they were going to be able to provide a better quality of life for their own citizens, while those same measures contributed to the global need. And that is the sweet spot that you want to pursue, because you cannot convince anyone, a president, father of a family, no one, you can't convince them to do something that they deem to be against their interest. It's just very difficult or impossible to do. If I'm going to tell you to do something that is against your interest, you probably will walk away. Well, but if I sit down and I talk to you and I say, tell me what you want. What do you really want to do over the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years? Where do you really want to go? Where are your interests? And then I bridge that and I say, well, those interests are aligned with the common good in the following way. Now I've enrolled you. And now you're actually willing to contribute to the global effort out of your own self-enlightened interests. And so that was the logic that we used to bring everyone around.
Thank you very much. And the time is moving very fast, so I think we close the session here. And thank you for very good questions, and I'm sure you're taking a lot with you home tonight. And we will actually finish with another meditation and another piece of music. So both of you please stay here, and Jill will come and play for us. And then we have some final thank you and announcements. Yes.
I create a vision of a world of truth, love, justice, and joy. A world in which every being, human and others, are safe, secure, and have a life of freedom, a life of love, a life of beauty. And I ask myself the question, what must I do today to be able to help create such a world? And I understand deeply that if I want to move towards such a world, if I wish to give a finger of cooperation to creating such a world, I need to embody those qualities within myself here and now. And in the midst of the darkness that exists today, I hold the light of this vision. And as I move towards that vision, in terms of my own personal transformation, so that I ensure that I follow the path of truth, the path of dignity, the path of love, care, compassion, and cooperation. I connect with others who share that same vision. And with help from above, I begin to see more and more move towards making that vision a reality. And that vision is no longer a dream, but our actions today give it practical shape, and we create that world. Om Shanti.